My name is Owen Mercer, and before everything failed, I was a lift maintenance electrician at Sugarloaf in western Maine. I was 32 years old, divorced, renting a small apartment outside Carabasset Valley, and working the kind of job most people only notice when something stops moving. I handled chairlift drive systems, backup power checks, tower lighting, control panels, loading carpets, and whatever else the mountain needed to keep paying guests moving uphill without thinking about how much equipment stood behind that simple ride. I knew the lodges, the service roads, the fuel tanks, the pump houses, the snowmaking buildings, and the dead corners on the mountain where radios worked poorly and wind carried sound farther than it should. That knowledge was the only reason I stayed alive when the outbreak reached us. In the beginning, nobody in the valley called it an outbreak. It was a string of bad reports from Portland, then Lewiston, then Bangor, then places farther south that had already started shutting down before the news admitted anything useful. The television used the same words for 3 days in a row: public safety incident, temporary closures, regional medical strain. At work, everybody had a version of the truth based on whoever they trusted most. The older mechanics listened to local radio and said it was panic making people stupid. The younger lift operators watched short videos on their phones and said people were turning violent for no reason, as if they had lost the part of their mind that recognized family or pain or restraint. By the fourth day, we stopped arguing about what it was called and started arguing about whether the access road into the valley should be blocked. Sugarloaf was between seasons when it started getting bad. The late-season crowds were gone. Summer operations had not fully ramped up. That left the mountain in a strange, half-open state, with maintenance crews, a handful of office staff, some hospitality people, a few year-round residents, and contractors moving through buildings designed to hold far more people than were actually there. Empty space became a problem fast. Empty parking lots, empty lodges, empty condos with half the blinds down. In a normal year, quiet was part of the appeal. During those first days, quiet made every human sound feel wrong. I was in the maintenance building behind the base area at about 6:40 a.m. when my supervisor, Dennis Hale, came in holding his phone out like it had personally offended him. Dennis was 58, had worked mountain systems longer than I had been alive, and trusted mechanical things more than people. He told me there had been another incident in Farmington overnight. A man attacked paramedics during transport after being reported unconscious. Then 2 officers were injured in the emergency room. The state police were asking people to stay home unless travel was necessary. He said it in that flat way he had when he was trying not to overreact. There were 4 of us in the shop that morning besides Dennis. Me, Kyle Brody, a 26-year-old snowmaking technician who treated every situation as temporary until proven otherwise. Marta Ruiz, a vehicle mechanic from New Hampshire who could rebuild a hydraulic system with half the parts and twice the patience. And Glenn Pritchard, who handled building systems and boilers and always looked like he had slept in his work jacket even when he hadn't. We stood around the steel work table while the coffee maker hissed behind us and listened to Dennis tell us upper management wanted essential systems checked in case the mountain property had to shut down fast. That should have sent me home. Instead, it pulled me deeper in. Anyone who has worked at a resort knows what essential systems really means. Not the things guests think are essential. The things that keep the place from becoming a frozen, flooded, dark mess when nobody is around. Backup generators, fire alarms, pump rooms, mechanical spaces, fuel levels, water pressure, building controls, communications cabinets, kitchen coolers, access doors that fail locked or fail open. When management said, check essential systems, what they meant was, if the world gets worse by noon, make sure the mountain does not become impossible to reclaim. By 8:15 a.m., I was in the main base lodge basement with a multimeter in one hand and a flashlight in my jacket pocket, tracing a problem on an automatic transfer switch tied to the emergency power panel. The lodge was too quiet for a building that size. No skiers clomping through in boots, no music, no line noise from ticket counters. Just air handlers, refrigeration compressors, and the occasional radio burst. I remember that morning in strange detail because it was the last time the world still felt technical. Every problem had a diagram. Every failure had a sequence. Then the radio traffic changed. The first call came from outside the valley. A county dispatcher relaying that traffic was backing up on Route 27. Vehicles were being abandoned, and responders were stretched thin. The second came from security at one of the condo clusters near the access road. A resident had attacked another resident in the parking lot after what sounded like a medical episode. The third was from the health clinic. A nurse wanted to know if the resort had any additional first aid supplies or maintenance staff with protective gear because they were locking their doors and people were banging to get in. At 9:30 a.m., Dennis told all non-essential staff to go home, but by then, home had become the wrong direction. Kyle left anyway. He lived 20 minutes down valley and thought getting ahead of the crowd was smarter than staying in a resort full of strangers. I watched him throw his bag in his truck and drive off. I never saw him again. Marta stayed. Glenn stayed. Dennis stayed. So did about a dozen other people spread across base operations, food service, ski patrol, administration, and facilities. Not because we were brave, because all of us had reasons to doubt that the road out was safer than the buildings we already knew. By noon, the local internet was cutting in and out. Cell service still worked, but it was overloaded. My ex-wife sent me 3 messages asking if I was coming south. My younger brother in Auburn told me to get as remote as possible and stay there. My mother left a voicemail at 12:14 p.m. saying she loved me and to not trust crowds. I saved it and replayed it so many times over the next month that I can still hear the tremor in her breathing before she hung up. Around 1 p.m., Dennis called whoever remained to a conference room off the main hallway. There were 11 of us. Dennis, me, Marta, Glenn, 2 ski patrol staff named Hannah Vose and Eric Tannen, a front desk manager named Priya Dandekar, a line cook named Mike Bell, a housekeeper named Sophie Dubé, security officer Leon Carver, who had once been a deputy in Franklin County, and a 19-year-old bike park worker named Nate Collins, who had stayed because his parents were in Massachusetts and told him not to travel. Dennis laid out the situation cleanly. We had a mountain with multiple buildings, backup power, stored food, fuel, water, maintenance vehicles, a clinic room, radio equipment, and terrain that favored anyone who knew it. What we did not have was enough people to secure the whole resort. If we stayed, we needed to choose one structure, fortify it, and abandon the rest except for controlled supply runs. Most people assumed the best choice was one of the smaller maintenance buildings, easier to secure, fewer doors, less glass. I was the one who said the abandoned ski lodge on the west side made more sense. The West Lodge had been used heavily in earlier decades and only lightly in recent years. It sat above the main base area, not at the summit, but high enough that reaching it required a service road or a long climb on foot. It had thick framing, a stone lower level, limited approach angles, rooftop access, kitchen infrastructure, storage rooms, and a maintenance garage annex that shared a wall with the utility corridor. More important, most people in a crisis would either head downhill toward roads or cluster around the visible base village. Very few would choose to move uphill toward an older lodge that was usually dark and closed. Leon liked the idea immediately. Defensible high ground, known access routes, good sight lines. Hannah liked that it had medical room space and snowcat garage proximity. Marta asked the right question, which was whether its water system could stay live without constant pumping from the lower facilities. Glenn said yes, with work. There was a domestic water tank up the line, plus gravity support, though pressure would need careful management. The septic system had not been heavily used in months. The backup generator at that lodge had not been load tested recently, but he thought it could be brought online. Dennis looked at me and asked whether I was volunteering to bet my life on a building I had not worked in full-time for 3 years. I told him that I knew the electrical room, knew where the shutters still functioned, knew which kitchen doors had bent frames, and knew that the old lodge had one advantage no other building had. Most of its weak points were already known because guests had complained about them for years. In normal life, that was bad management. In a collapse, it was intelligence. So we moved. That first relocation was the cleanest thing we did all month. We used 2 utility carts, 1 pickup truck, and a tracked maintenance vehicle to haul food, bottled water, first aid kits, toolboxes, blankets, radios, propane cylinders, battery packs, chain, fuel cans, and every box of flashlight batteries we could find. We left behind furniture, office supplies, and almost everything decorative. Priya wanted to bring cash from the front desk safe. Dennis told her cash was dead weight. She stared at him for a second, then nodded and carried cases of shelf-stable milk instead. By 3:40 p.m. we were inside the West Lodge, and by 4:20 p.m. we had started hardening it. The building had 3 levels. The lower level was partly stone and concrete, with mechanical rooms, a small ski patrol clinic space from older years, kitchen storage, and the garage annex. The main level had the dining room, check-in counter from its hotel era, a large stone fireplace, kitchen access, restrooms, and broad window lines facing the slope. The upper floor had old staff rooms, office spaces, linen storage, and a long corridor that overlooked the main room. There were too many windows for comfort, but many were narrow and high, and the most exposed ones could be blocked from inside. We worked until dark with the efficiency that only shows up when nobody has time left for ego. Marta and Glenn locked down the garage doors and inspected the generator. I ran extension power from a temporary battery bank to lighting points we wanted to preserve if the main building power failed. Leon and Eric started moving furniture to create internal barriers, not at exterior entrances where they could trap us, but deeper inside where we could fall back without losing the whole floor. Hannah and Priya inventoried medical supplies and food. Mike and Sophie cleared the kitchen, throwing out perishables that would spoil first if refrigeration failed. Dennis and Nate hauled plywood from storage and started covering lower glass panels from the inside with carriage bolts, washers, and anything else that would hold. It got dark before we were ready, and the first real test came around 8:10 p.m. We heard engines on the service road first. 2 vehicles climbing too fast. Leon killed most interior lights. We moved to second-floor windows with radios and flashlights covered by jackets. A pickup truck and a sport utility vehicle stopped in front of the lodge. 6 people got out. One man shouted that they had seen lights and needed help. Another shouted that someone in one of their vehicles had been bitten. That word changed the room. It sounds childish now, but in those early days the difference between hearing attack, hearing sick, and hearing bitten mattered. Attack meant chaos. Sick meant uncertainty. Bitten meant everybody was already carrying a theory they were scared to say out loud. Dennis told no one to open the door. Priya wanted us to help them. Hannah wanted at least to assess from a distance. Leon said that if they were telling the truth, bringing them inside a building with 11 people and limited exits could kill all of us. He also pointed out something I had not noticed right away. The vehicles had come up the service road in the dark without stopping at the gate, which meant whoever drove them either knew the mountain well or had followed someone who did. We used the exterior public address speaker near the loading zone. My voice shook more than I wanted it to as I told them to stay back from the building and identify themselves. One man gave his name as Trevor. Another woman said they had come from Kingfield and had nowhere else to go. Their injured person never got out of the vehicle. Leon asked them to back their vehicles 20 yards away and wait for instructions. The man named Trevor shouted again, angrier this time. He said a woman in the vehicle was fading, and if we were going to let her die, we ought to say it plainly. Nobody answered him for about 10 seconds. Then Hannah said she would go outside. Dennis said no. She said if they were still human, leaving them untreated was a decision we would remember for the rest of our lives. Leon said going outside could make it the last decision of all our lives. They argued in low voices that somehow felt louder than Trevor's shouting. Then the choice was made for us. The rear door of the sport utility vehicle opened, and a woman stumbled out. She was upright, but wrong. Not movie wrong, not dramatic. She moved like somebody walking through a room she did not recognize while trying not to fall. Trevor reached for her. She turned into him so fast it took my brain a second to understand what I was seeing. He went down. Another man tried to pull her back. She grabbed him with both hands and drove him into the side of the vehicle hard enough to wring metal. Then, all 6 people were moving at once, and none of it made sense in a way that my mind wanted to organize. Screaming, door slams. Somebody trying to reverse while another person was half out of the vehicle. A flashlight spinning on the ground. The woman who had been fading no longer looked weak at all. She looked focused in the most terrible possible way. On the nearest body. We never opened the door. The truck backed into the lodge retaining wall and stalled. One of the people from the pickup sprinted up the steps and started pounding on the entrance with both fists, begging to be let in. I remember Sophie crying behind me. I remember Hannah saying, "Please," like she still thought there was a version of this where we could save him. Then the others reached the steps. Leon did what none of us wanted to admit might be necessary. He fired through the narrow glass panel beside the door from inside the vestibule. He used his duty pistol, which he had kept after leaving law enforcement and stored legally in his vehicle. The first shot dropped one of the attackers off the steps. The others recoiled, then came again. The gunfire inside that lodge changed everything. No one who has never been in an enclosed building during a handgun discharge understands how violent the sound is. It was more than noise. It hit my chest. It turned the doorway into a place that no longer belonged to normal life. Leon fired twice more, controlled, not fast. Another body fell. The man on the steps got dragged sideways in the struggle and disappeared under the others. I do not know if he was still alive when we lost sight of him. After that, the remaining people outside broke apart in different directions. One ran toward the vehicles. Two moved down slope, erratic but fast. Then it was just the idling engine of the sport utility vehicle. One headlight pointed into the trees, and the sound of someone striking the lodge door from outside every few seconds, like they had forgotten why they were doing it, but not that they needed to keep doing it. We held positions until after midnight. Nobody slept much. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Mike made coffee at 1:30 a.m., and it tasted burnt and metallic because the kitchen water line still had air in it from the changeover. We drank it anyway. At 4:45 a.m., Leon and I watched first light come into the parking area through a slit between the plywood and the window frame. There were 3 bodies in view. The 2 vehicles were still there. The headlight battery had finally died. Nothing moved. Around 6 a.m., Dennis gathered us and set the rules that shaped the rest of our time in the lodge. Nobody opened exterior doors alone. Nobody approached an unknown person without cover. Nobody left the building without a radio, a partner, a fixed return time, and a clear reason. We would not attempt rescue operations downhill unless we had specific evidence of survivors and an escape route. Fuel would be rationed from day one. Generator power would only be used on schedules, not continuously. Firearms, tools, knives, and protective equipment would be issued by task, not by preference. And from that moment on, the lodge was our shelter. Not a waiting room until government help arrived. No one argued with him. The first week was all work. People who think survival is mostly action do not understand how many hours get spent on doors, water, waste, cold, inventory, and sleep. The West Lodge became livable because we treated it like a system, not a hideout. We designated zones: clean kitchen, dirty entry point, sleeping rooms upstairs, medical room downstairs, tool and repair bench in the old rental alcove, water fill station by the service sink, trash staging in the garage annex until we could burn or bury under controlled conditions. Leon insisted on a written watch schedule. Priya made wall charts out of old event posters turned backwards. Hannah logged every cut, fever, cough, and strain in case infection was spreading through more than bites and direct contact. Glenn and I did building rounds every morning and evening, like we were still on payroll. The generator turned out to be our first real victory. It was a diesel unit sized to keep the core systems alive, not the whole lodge in comfort. Glenn bled the lines, Marta checked the starter battery and fuel filters, and I traced a fault in the transfer relay that had probably existed for longer than anyone knew. When we brought it up under test load, it held. Not perfectly. It hunted a little when the kitchen compressors tried to cycle together, so we changed the order of what we energized. But it ran. For 4 hours in the morning and 4 in the evening, we had refrigeration, battery charging, lights in key spaces, and enough power to keep the domestic water system steady. After power came the windows. We covered what we could and left observation slits where we needed visibility. We did not make the mistake of sealing everything so tightly that we blinded ourselves. The front entrance became a trap zone. Outer doors chained, inner doors reinforced, stairwell above it assigned as an overwatch point. The ground-level service corridor on the east side got blocked with steel shelving, bolted through floor plates. The loading dock doors were backed by 2 sand-filled maintenance carts. The garage annex became our controlled vehicle bay and secondary escape point because it opened toward a narrower road line through trees. Food mattered next. People assume ski lodges are loaded with useful supplies year-round. Some are. Ours had enough dry goods to help, but not enough to last. Bags of rice, pasta, flour, cooking oil, canned tomatoes, beans, commercial soup base, peanut butter, protein bars, frozen meat that would only stay good as long as refrigeration held, and cases of drink mix from banquet storage. Mike took inventory like his life depended on it, because it did. He calculated calories on legal pads, and told us within 48 hours that if we stayed disciplined, the lodge alone gave us maybe 5 weeks before we had to rely heavily on scavenging, hunting, or whatever remained in the condos and support buildings. Water was better. The mountain knew how to move water. Even in off-season, the infrastructure gave us a fighting chance. Domestic water still came through, though we boiled anything we were uncertain about and filled every container we could find in case pumping failed later. I spent an entire afternoon labeling valves with a paint marker because under stress people forget which handle shuts off what. That sounds minor until the wrong valve empties a pressure tank you cannot easily refill. By day 6, the outside world had gone almost silent. Not literally silent. We still heard distant engines sometimes, wind through lift towers, occasional gunshots from the valley, fewer every day. Once a helicopter passed far enough south that we only heard it for maybe 15 seconds. But the pattern of normal human activity was gone. No regular traffic, no maintenance crews, no guest chatter, no deliveries climbing the access road. The resort had become a shell around us, and the shell extended miles through closed condos, empty lots, service paths, and tree lines. We did our first organized supply run on day 7. The target was the lower base lodge and adjacent administrative offices. We needed medical supplies, radios, batteries, fuel stabilizer, maps, winter clothing stock from rental storage, and anything else compact and useful. The team was Leon, me, Marta, and Hannah. Dennis stayed behind in command because everyone naturally looked to him by then, and because if we lost him on a run, the group would take a harder hit than if we lost almost anyone else. We moved at 7:10 a.m. in the utility-tracked vehicle, keeping speed low to reduce noise. Leon rode front passenger with binoculars and his pistol. I drove. Marta had a 12-gauge pump shotgun from Resort Wildlife Control Storage, mostly used in past years for occasional animal deterrence. Hannah carried a pry bar, radio, medical kit, and a fixed-blade knife she wore like she hated needing it. We parked short of the base area and approached the buildings on foot. The valley looked like a place after bad weather, except the damage was human. Cars stopped crooked in the access lanes. One shuttle bus angled against a curb with its door open. Luggage scattered near one condo loop. No fires burned anymore. Whatever had been actively happening down there had passed, leaving the aftermath to weather and time. Inside the base lodge we found signs of a rushed evacuation. Trays in the cafeteria. An overturned stroller. A security door half down because someone had tried to close it without power. We also found our first close encounter away from the lodge. It was in the rental hall near the boot benches. One person. Male, maybe mid-40s, resort guest or contractor, hard to say. He was standing at the end of the corridor, facing a wall display as if reading it. His clothes were dirty but mostly intact. He did not react to our flashlight beams right away. Hannah whispered that he might still be alive. Then he turned. What struck me most was not rage. It was emptiness directed into motion. He saw us and moved immediately, not with the staggering weakness people expect, but with commitment. Leon called out once for him to stop. He kept coming. Marta fired from behind a boot bench rest. The shotgun hit, driving him sideways into rental lockers. The sound in that tiled corridor made all of us flinch. The man kept trying to rise until Leon ended it with a second shot at closer range. We stood there, listening afterward, waiting to hear if the noise had brought others. It had. Not many. 2, maybe 3. We heard impacts from deeper in the food court and the strange half-running foot drag that I later came to recognize before I saw it. We withdrew fast, grabbed what we could from administration, and were back in the tracked vehicle within 15 minutes. It was not a disaster, but it taught us 2 things. First, the infected did not simply wander aimlessly. Sound and sight still directed them. Second, buildings that looked empty often were not. From then on, every supply run got treated as an entry into a structure that might already contain a threat. That afternoon, Nate asked Leon to teach him how to shoot. Leon refused at first. Nate was 19, scared and eager in a way that made careful people nervous. But Nate kept pushing, not out of bravado, but because he had been on watch all week, hearing noises in the dark and knowing he would be useless if the lodge got breached. Finally, Leon agreed to start with safety, not marksmanship. Clear chamber, muzzle awareness, trigger discipline, sight picture, breath control, real basics. Dennis approved it with a warning that nobody touched a firearm unsupervised until Leon said otherwise. That became another system. Training, not just with guns, pry bars, radios, vehicle startup procedures, generator checks, shutting doors quietly, medical response, winter clothing layers, and route familiarity. People calm down when they have tasks that can be learned. Fear loses some of its power when it gets interrupted by competence. By the second week, the lodge began to feel less like a place we were hiding in and more like a place we were running. Sophie turned an upstairs linen room into organized clothing storage. Priya kept food records and eventually started posting small notes on the wall like, "Boil water batch after evening power window," and "Save clean jars." Mike developed meals that used less fuel and still felt like meals. Rice with canned chicken and dried herbs. Pasta with bean sauce thickened using kitchen stock concentrate. Oatmeal with peanut butter for calories. We started eating together in one section of the old dining room because Dennis said isolated people got careless. He was right. The first human threat that was not infected arrived on day 13. 3 men came up the western maintenance road on foot around noon, visible early because the snowmaking trails had not fully greened over yet, and the line cuts gave us sight down the slope. They saw the lodge and headed straight for it, which meant they were not wandering. Leon watched them through binoculars from the upper corridor and said 2 were armed with long guns, hunting rifles most likely. The third carried a backpack and something long wrapped in cloth. They stopped outside, shouting distance, and raised both hands. Leon and Dennis spoke with them through the public address speaker. They said they were survivors from Stratton, had come north through back roads, and needed food, shelter, and a place to regroup. One man introduced himself as Colby, another as Russ. The third never gave a name at first. Dennis asked why they were carrying rifles if they only wanted shelter. Colby answered in a tone that sounded practiced. He said any man traveling through Maine unarmed that week would not last long. He was not wrong, but that was not the problem. The problem was how fast their story changed under questions. They said they had been on foot for 2 days, yet their boots were too clean for that terrain. They said they had no vehicle, yet Russ kept glancing down slope toward the trees where a service road curved out of sight. They said they were hungry, but none of them looked weak. And when Leon asked where exactly they had slept the previous night, Colby answered, "A cabin off the road," without even pretending to know the road's name. Dennis did not let them in. We offered a trade instead. Food, bottled water, and basic medical items left at a marked point 50 yards from the building, in exchange for them leaving immediately and not returning with others. Colby smiled in a way I still remember, because it was the first smile I saw after the collapse that had no warmth in it at all. He asked why a mountain lodge with smoke from the vent stacks would deny fellow survivors a warm place to sleep. Leon told him because a secure shelter was worth more than manners. The standoff lasted 20 minutes. In the end, they took the supplies and walked away. We tracked them from upper windows until tree cover hid them. That night, Leon doubled the watch. At 2:18 a.m., Nate radioed that he heard metal from the garage side. We went to stations half awake and fully alert. Leon, Dennis, and I took the lower corridor. Marta covered the internal angle from the workshop alcove with the shotgun. Upstairs, Hannah and Priya watched the front slope and east service entrance. For 3 minutes, we heard nothing. Then another scrape. Slow. Testing. Leon whispered that they were probing for a weakness. When the garage exterior handle finally moved, it did so carefully. Not like an infected person reacting to noise, like a human hand trying not to be heard. Dennis counted us down on his fingers. On 3, Leon hit the floodlight switch tied to the garage apron, and I triggered the horn wired to an old utility vehicle parked inside the annex. The noise slammed into the night. We heard one man curse, another stumble, then boots hitting gravel in a full retreat. Leon fired one warning shot into the dirt beyond the garage door. We did not pursue. That was the hardest part. Everything in me wanted to chase them, see who it was, finish the problem. But secure people do not leave walls at night because of pride. At dawn, we found signs near the garage. Fresh pry marks on the hasp plate, boot prints, and 30 yards into the trees, partly covered with a branch, a small trail camera aimed at the building. That changed us more than the first infected attack had. The infected were dangerous, but simple in their own terrible way. Human predators could watch, learn, wait, and come back better prepared. Dennis ordered immediate camouflage discipline. No visible lights from the upper floor after dark. Cooking vent use reduced. Exterior trash removed. Vehicle tracks brushed when practical. We also changed our routine timings so nobody observing from far off could map our power windows or watch schedule easily. For the next 4 days, we saw no sign of the men returning. Then we found their truck. It was hidden behind an old service shed farther west, beyond a maintenance spur road used mostly for snowmaking access. Leon, Marta, and I spotted it during a fuel reconnaissance run. An older half-ton pickup, green, backed under tree cover, bed loaded with camping gear, coolers, and plastic tubs. No one visible. We withdrew and watched from concealment for over an hour. Eventually, one of the men, the nameless one from the lodge encounter, emerged from the tree line carrying a bucket and walked to the truck. He looked thinner than before and nervous. That was when Leon made the call to leave. Marta hated the decision. She said if we did not deal with them now, they would keep circling us until they found a way in. Leon agreed in principle. Dennis over radio said the truck location gave us information, and information was more useful than a gunfight in uncertain woods. We marked the spot on a paper trail map and pulled back. That same evening, Glenn collapsed during generator hours. Not from infection. From a cardiac problem he had probably been ignoring for years. Chest pain, sweating, left arm weakness, gray skin. Hannah recognized it immediately and started oxygen from an old clinic cylinder. We had aspirin. We had nitroglycerin from the medical room. We had blood pressure cuffs and blankets, and 10 people ready to help. What we did not have was a functioning ambulance system. Dennis called the county emergency frequency anyway. Nothing. Leon tried law channels. Nothing. We even attempted an old mountain repeater route to see if any state-level relay remained live. Nothing useful came back except static and one broken voice from somewhere south saying roads were blocked and medical facilities were not receiving walk-ins anymore. Glenn survived the night, but not the next day. That is the truth of a collapse. Sometimes the thing that kills someone has nothing to do with infected people at all. It is the ordinary emergency that no longer has a system waiting for it. Glenn had spent the first 2 weeks making sure we had heat, hot water, and a running generator. Then his own body failed in a world where expertise and effort could no longer buy treatment. We buried him above the tree line west of the lodge, where the ground was softer than it was near the maintenance roads. Dennis said a few words. Nobody said much else. Nate cried openly. Marta stood apart from the group with both hands in her jacket pockets and stared down the valley the whole time. After Glenn died, the lodge became quieter. Not weaker, quieter. Everybody realized that survival was not a matter of simply being smart enough. It was time, chance, systems, weather, and whether the next bad thing arrived before you had recovered from the last one. We made it into June by learning the mountain better than ever. There were supply caches hidden in old places, spare radios in patrol lockers, emergency blankets in an out-of-service first aid point halfway up the slope, fuel drums logged on paper but forgotten digitally because the network was gone, a side-building freezer that still held packaged food because no one had checked it during the first week, maintenance manuals, maps, tools, rope, carabiners, weatherproof clothing, batteries, hand warmers, cleaning chemicals. We scavenged carefully and never took a route twice in the same pattern if we could help it. The infected thinned in the valley as weeks passed, but they did not vanish. Some wandered down slope, some got trapped in buildings, some lingered near routes where human movement still occasionally happened. We learned their triggers. Sudden sound mattered most. Visible movement next. Light at night if close enough. They were not coordinated, but they did not need to be. A single mistake in a stairwell or loading dock could still kill you. The men in the truck remained a problem. By the 4th week, we knew there were at least 5 of them, not 3. Leon saw 2 additional figures during a distant observation near the service shed. We also found signs that they had been looting condos farther south. Doors forced. empty pantry shelves, missing vehicle batteries, a propane cage cut open with power tools or a bolt cutter. We suspected they were watching us and other survivor pockets if any remained. They had not attacked again directly, which made them worse in my mind. Patient people are harder to predict. Then Priya made an important connection. She had worked front desk for years and recognized Colby's face from before the collapse. Not as a guest, as a contractor associated with a real estate group that had shown interest in distressed mountain properties. He had visited twice with investors, touring old lodges and underused buildings. If it was the same man, then he already knew the West Lodge existed, knew its road access, and possibly knew enough of its layout to guess where weaknesses might be. Dennis took that hard. We all did. A random threat is one thing. A threat that understands the property is another. So we changed strategy. Until then, we had been purely defensive. Now we started controlled counter-observation. Not attacks, information gathering. Leon and I spent 3 mornings tracking distant movement lines around the Western Service Spur using binoculars, old patrol routes, and lift maintenance catwalk access on lower towers for better sight. Hannah hated it because she thought it was the first step toward becoming aggressors instead of survivors. Leon told her that in this world, allowing armed men to study our shelter without learning about theirs was not morality. It was negligence. On the second morning, we found their camp. Not at the truck, beyond it in an abandoned ski-in cabin that had once housed seasonal staff. They had chosen it for the same reasons we chose the West Lodge: defensible angle, partial concealment, known water source nearby, and fast access to multiple service routes. Through a broken loft window, we saw movement, cookware, stored gear, and what looked like a stack of long guns against an interior wall. There were also signs that they had taken people. I do not say that lightly. We found women's clothing in the yard that did not match the sizes of the men we had seen. A child's backpack, medical packaging, and near the back steps, a handmade wooden crutch too small for any adult in their group. We never found the people those items belonged to, but the implication was enough. Dennis listened to our report in silence and then asked a question no one wanted to hear. If they come here in force, can we stop them? Leon answered honestly. Maybe, once. That became the line dividing the first phase of life in the lodge from the second. Up to that point, our goal had been surviving each day. After that conversation, our goal became surviving the season. The problem with the ski lodge as shelter is that it makes sense in cold weather. High ground, thick structure, storage, defensible routes. In summer, the mountain opens. Trees fill in. Approach lines become less visible. More roads dry out. More people can move on foot without exposure. If the valley was going to repopulate with desperate survivors, scavengers, or worse, the lodge might go from hidden refuge to obvious prize. Dennis decided we needed a deeper plan. He had us map every viable shelter on resort property that could function as fallback positions. Mid-mountain patrol hut, too small. Upper pump station, good for supplies but not living. A maintenance shop near the snowmaking pond, useful but exposed. An old summit communications shack, impossible to support long-term. A detached employee housing block. Too many windows. None were better than the West Lodge, but several could serve as temporary caches or emergency escape points. We also started building redundancy inside the lodge. Stored water on upper and lower levels. duplicate medical kits, extra radios hidden in vent spaces, food caches not all in one pantry, fuel split between multiple locked spaces, one bag per person packed and ready by bedroll or room. It felt paranoid until the night the fire started. It happened on day 36 at 11:50 p.m. Not a big fire, not at first, a smell, then smoke in the East Service Hall. Somebody had pushed a flaming bundle through a broken lower pane we had not fully reinforced because it sat behind a metal grill and had seemed too narrow to matter. The fire caught dust, insulation board, and a stack of spare cardboard trays. By the time Nate on watch saw it, it had started moving along the wall cavity. We put it down fast. Fire extinguishers first, then hose line from the janitorial tap, then overhaul with pry bars to stop hidden spread. No one died. We lost a section of corridor wall, some stored paper goods, and one of the better rolling utility carts. But that was not the point. The point was that a human being had tested the building and found a way to hurt us without trying to enter. At dawn, Leon found boot prints in the wet ground below the broken pane. Not infected. Not random. Intentional. Dennis stopped talking about whether the Western group would become a problem. They already were. The next supply run became a mission with a different purpose, not revenge. Disruption. Leon, Marta, and I moved before sunrise to the hidden truck position. The truck was gone, likely at the cabin or out on a raid. We placed sharpened steel scrap and cut nails under leaf litter along the only clean turnaround point, then withdrew. At the cabin, we observed from distance until one man emerged carrying water cans, not Colby, another. He limped slightly. We watched him disappear behind the structure. Leon radioed back that we were not engaging, just learning. Then the truck returned. It rolled in too fast, loaded heavy, and hit the concealed scrap on the turnaround. One tire burst almost immediately. The driver overcorrected, clipped a stump, and stalled crossways. Men jumped out shouting. We could not hear words, only anger. They were occupied for the next hour changing the wheel, dragging gear out of the bed, and arguing in full view. That told us something valuable. They had no disciplined perimeter. No scout out. No measured response. They were dangerous, but sloppy under stress. We brought that home and built our next plan around it. I wish I could say we simply outlasted them. That is not what happened. On day 42, they came at dusk with 6 men, 1 vehicle, and enough nerve to nearly end us. Their truck climbed the service road openly, engine loud, while 2 men on foot flanked through trees. It was a proper assault only in the loosest possible sense, but it was coordinated enough. The truck stopped short of the apron and used the engine block as cover. 2 rifle shots hit the stone facade below an upper window. Another shattered already covered glass at the dining room edge. Inside the lodge, the noise became confusion in seconds. Dennis took command with more force than I had ever heard from him. Positions. No free shooting. Watch flanks. Hold fire until confirmed targets. Leon moved to the upper overlook with his pistol and one of the hunting rifles we had recovered on earlier runs. Marta went lower east with the shotgun. I took the stair landing above the entry where I could watch both front approach and interior fallback. Hannah and Priya pulled Sophie and Mike into the lower medical space with Nate covering the corridor. The attack was ugly because real attacks usually are. Not clean exchanges, noise, confusion, fragments of information. things breaking where you are not looking. One flanking man reached the garage side and tried the same area they had probed weeks earlier. Marta caught him in the apron floodlight and fired once through the narrow opening we had built into the annex barrier. He fell and did not get up. The truck team fired toward the light, but from too low an angle to hit her. At the front, one of them tried to rush the vestibule with a crowbar and got stopped by chained outer doors. Leon shot from above through a prepared slit and dropped him on the steps. The others pulled back behind the truck and continued firing irregularly, more to keep us pinned than to breach. Then the infected arrived. They had either followed the truck noise from lower slopes or already been moving nearby and converged on the gunfire. First, two shapes from the tree line. Then another. Then more. Not a horde. I hate that word because it turns everything theatrical. It was maybe 7 or 8 infected people, enough to complicate a fight in a narrow place. They did not care who the men in the truck were. They reacted to movement and sound. The change outside was immediate. One attacker tried to shift positions and got hit from the side by an infected runner who had come out of the shadows near the retaining wall. He fired once, point blank, stumbled, and went down. Another attacker abandoned the truck and ran toward the trees, only to draw 2 more after him. For about 30 seconds, the entire assault lost shape as survival instinct took over. Dennis saw it before the rest of us. He got on the radio and said, "Do not chase, let the mountain solve what it can." So we held. It was one of the coldest decisions I have ever agreed with. But it was the right one. The men outside had come to burn or take our shelter. The infected did not know sides. Opening the doors into that chaos would have exposed us to both. The fight outside collapsed into scattered motion, then silence broken by isolated gunshots downslope. 10 minutes later, the truck sat idling with the driver door open and nobody visible near it. Leon watched through glass for another 20 minutes before he spoke. "I think it's over." It was not fully over, but the attack was. At first light, we cleared the apron with a 3-person team. 2 dead men near the front. Blood trails into the trees. The truck still running on fumes. 1 dead infected, pinned between the retaining wall and the front bumper. We shut off the engine, stripped the vehicle of useful gear, and pushed it downhill enough to block part of the service approach before setting it in neutral. It became a barrier after that, a reminder, and eventually rusted into the landscape like everything else. We never saw Colby again after that night. Maybe he died in the woods. Maybe he fled south. Maybe he found another group to exploit. All I know is the organized threat to the lodge ended there. We still had dangers, just not that one. Summer settled over the mountain in slow stages. Mud gave way to grass. Insects came. The air lost its sharp edge at night. Without winter's cover, the resort looked less like a fortress and more like what it really was. A business built in layers over a steep piece of ground, full of improvised solutions hidden behind guest-facing charm. Living there stripped away all illusion. We knew which pipes sang before losing pressure, which doors swelled in humidity, which roof drains clogged first, which old electrical panels had to be tapped on the side to seat fully. I sometimes think that was why we survived as long as we did. We stopped treating the lodge like scenery and started treating it like a machine that could keep us alive if we respected its limits. Not everybody stayed. Mike left in July. He had family in New Hampshire, and he could not stand not knowing whether they were alive. Dennis argued with him for an hour. Hannah cried when Mike packed. Priya wrote him route notes and a list of places that might still have supplies if he made it south. Leon gave him one of the better radios, though range would fail once he left the mountain. Marta tuned up an old dual-sport motorcycle from the storage garage for him because it used less fuel than a truck and could pass wrecks more easily. Mike rode out at 6:30 a.m. on a clear morning. We watched him go from the upper balcony. He turned once on the road below and lifted a hand. That was it. 3 days later, we got one transmission from him, weak and broken, somewhere near Skowhegan. He said the roads were bad, towns worse, and he was still moving. Then nothing ever again. Nate nearly left after that. He said staying felt like waiting to become furniture in an old building while the rest of the world sorted itself out somewhere else. Dennis did not tell him he was wrong. He only told him that movement for its own sake killed people. In the end, Nate stayed because Hannah convinced him that wanting to leave and being ready to leave were not the same thing. By late summer, we had a routine that almost resembled a life. Garden boxes made from broken deck boards near the south wall where light was good. Beans, potatoes, and hardy greens from forgotten seed packets Priya found in an employee apartment. Rain collection for non-drinking use. Small game traps set carefully outside main approach lines. Fishing trips to nearby water only when 2 armed people could go and return before dark. Laundry done by hand in tubs with strict water discipline. Haircut on the loading dock. Boots dried on racks built from ski poles. Board games from Lost and Found. A rule that no one ate alone unless sick. A second rule that no one sat watch longer than they could do it well. The lodge changed us physically, leaner, tougher, more weathered. The mirror in the upstairs restroom showed a face I recognized only by sequence. My beard grew in patchy at first, then fuller. My hands stayed cut and blackened from work no matter how much I scrubbed them. My hearing changed too. I stopped noticing some noises and fixating on others. Wind in the lift cables became background. A dropped wrench 2 rooms away could make my pulse jump. In September, we found more survivors. Not a group, 2 people. A father and his daughter in an old maintenance van near a forest pull-off north of the mountain access road. The father, Aaron Bellamy, was a carpenter from Rumford with a broken wrist and a fever from an infected cut that had nothing to do with bites. His daughter, Lucy, was 10 years old and calmer than many adults I had known before the world ended. They had been moving from cabin to cabin for weeks, avoiding towns, sleeping in the van when they had to. Aaron had heard there might be people at the ski area because he had once worked a summer renovation contract on one of the condo buildings and knew the place had service infrastructure. Taking them in was the best choice we made and the hardest to justify by our earlier rules. A child changes group math. Noise, risk, resource use, morale, vulnerability, future. Lucy walked into the West Lodge holding a stuffed fox, so worn its fur was almost flat, and every hardened line Dennis had built inside himself shifted visibly. Hannah treated Aaron in the clinic room. Priya found clothes for Lucy from unclaimed lost and found bins. Sophie set up a room on the upper floor near hers. Nate, who had been closest to leaving, spent the rest of that week fixing a window latch in Lucy's room that had not even been broken. Aaron recovered. Slowly. He turned out to be worth 3 good people in practical terms. He understood framing, roofing, doors, weather sealing, and how to turn scrap into useful structure. Within 2 weeks he had improved our upper-level shutters, rebuilt the damaged east corridor wall after the fire, and helped me brace the dining room windows with a removable interior lattice system that gave better impact resistance without costing all visibility. Lucy changed things in a different way. She forced us to remember what normal behavior looked like. Bedtime stories told in a lobby that once hosted wedding receptions. School lessons improvised from resort maps, old brochures, maintenance manuals, and whatever books had been left in guest rooms. She asked questions no adult wanted to ask aloud. Are there still schools somewhere? Is winter going to be worse? If all the bad people go away, does that mean the world gets quiet forever? No one had good answers. But the fact that she expected answers at all kept something human alive in the lodge. The first snowfall came early that year. Not much, a thin white line across the upper trails in October, gone by midday. Then another storm in November that stayed. When the mountain shifted back toward winter, something inside me settled. I knew winter systems. I knew freeze protection, fuel draw in cold, roof loading, door seals, ice hazards, snowpack routes. The infected moved differently in snow. People did too. The lodge once again felt like the right shelter at the right height. We did not romanticize winter. It was dangerous. Cold kills just as surely as violence. But winter also narrowed the problem set. Fewer travelers, more visible tracks, harder approaches, easier sound discipline, better justification for staying put. That second winter in the lodge was when I fully understood that I was not waiting to go home. This was home. Not because it was comfortable, not because I loved it, because I knew every working part of it and had put my hands on most of them. Because people I trusted slept upstairs and downstairs. Because Glenn was buried above the tree line. Because Mike had left from its front apron and disappeared into the wider world. Because Lucy learned multiplication at one of its old dining tables. Because the lodge had stopped being abandoned the day we chose to keep one another alive inside it. The hardest event of that winter came in January during a windstorm that knocked out the main external line. Feeding a relay we still used for limited communication attempts, the weather itself was bad enough. Gusts hard enough to shake shutters and drive powder snow into every seam. Around 9 p.m., one of the upper tower beacons on an adjacent lift line shorted and started arcing intermittently, throwing blue light through the trees. I knew if the line fully faulted and stayed live, it could create a fire risk or draw attention. Aaron and I went out in harnesses and headlamps with Leon covering from the lodge roof access. We moved by rope line along the maintenance path because visibility was awful. Standing under a lift tower in a storm, cutting power to dead infrastructure while the world around you has already ended, does something strange to your sense of scale. The job itself was familiar. Lockout, verify, dead, secure line. But every ordinary task had become final in a way it had not been before. There was no utility company coming behind us. No supervisor review. No later correction if we got it wrong. Just us, the mountain, and whether the fix held. It held. A lot of things held. Not everything. Dennis aged 10 years and 1. Hannah developed a tremor in her hands after too many months of carrying responsibility without rest, though she hid it well. Sophia rarely laughed anymore unless Lucy was in the room. Leon slept lightly and trusted nobody outside our walls, maybe for good reason, maybe too much. Marta became the backbone of everything mechanical and never said much about how tired she was. Priya started recording names of the missing in a ledger she kept private for a long time before showing us. Mike, Kyle, Glenn, people from the valley, guests, staff, anyone we could identify from badges, vehicles, or memory. She said somebody should keep count because losing names was another kind of collapse. Spring returned again, and with it came change. More signs of organized survivor pockets. Smoke in fixed locations far south. A repeated mirror signal from a ridgeline on 3 separate clear afternoons, likely intentional. Distant radio traffic stronger than before, not military, not official. Civilian groups learning to build networks. Aaron thought we should make contact. Leon wanted to avoid exposing the lodge until we knew who was out there. Dennis surprised me by agreeing with both of them. We would try to learn first. So we built a radio mast on the lodge roof using salvaged tubing and old antenna parts. I helped wire it. Priya and Hannah helped log frequencies and call patterns. Nate, who by then had become steady in ways the first frightened weeks never suggested, took a real interest in radio procedure. After 12 days of listening, we heard the same voice twice on a low-power regional channel identifying a supply and survivor exchange point operating intermittently near Farmington under armed guard and strict rules. They were trading medicine, tools, seed, fuel, and information. No raiders tolerated. No entry after dark. All visitors screened outdoors. It sounded either like the first decent thing we had heard in months or the best trap yet. Dennis said we would verify. Leon, Aaron, and I made the trip. The exchange point was real. A repurposed equipment yard with chain-link fencing, a generator, watch posts, and about 20 people running it with the tired professionalism of those who had learned too much too fast. Former public works staff, one nurse practitioner, a National Guard mechanic who had lost his unit during early deployments, a retired game warden, and others. They had rules, they had records, they had scars. Most importantly, they had no interest in taking over our mountain. They wanted routes, weather notes, fuel knowledge, medical trade, and friendly shelters in the region because isolation was killing people almost as fast as violence. That day changed the future of the lodge more than any gunfight or supply run. We were no longer an island pretending the mainland was gone. We started slow, trade first, diesel additives, and spare electrical parts from us in exchange for antibiotics, hand tools, and seed stock. Later, information, root conditions, known infected concentrations, bad actors to avoid. Then, eventually, people. A man with welding experience who spent 2 weeks helping us repair cracked brackets on the garage doors. Hannah sharing medical training for basic wound care. Nate helping establish better radio repeat through higher ground. Priya copying names from her ledger into a regional missing and found list. The lodge remained ours, but it became part of something larger. That did not magically fix the world. There were still dead towns, dangerous roads, ruined families, hungry people, and stretches of land where going missing was easy. The infected still existed. They always would for a long time, maybe longer than any of us wanted to think about. Winter still threatened. Fuel still ran low. Buildings still failed when deferred maintenance caught up with them, but the logic of pure siege ended. We stopped living minute to minute and started planning by season. Years could have passed that way. Maybe they still will. I am telling this from a room on the second floor of that same lodge, sitting at a desk that once held guest brochures. Outside my window, the lower trail cut is green. The truck from the night of the attack still sits half off the service road, stripped down to usefulness and memory. The old sign on the main hall still hangs crooked because every time I think about fixing it, something more important comes up. Lucy is older now and reads in the lobby after dinner. Aaron rebuilt the south deck with timber from a collapsed storage shed. Marta keeps the generator running with the kind of skill that should have earned her a better life than this. Leon still watches newcomers, like they all carry matches in a dry forest. Dennis walks slower, but when something serious happens, everyone still turns toward him. As for me, I do what I did before the world fell apart. I keep systems running. I check lines, switches, pumps, batteries, heating loops, shutters, radios, and whatever else sits between people I care about and failure. I used to think that was a background job, something invisible unless it went wrong. Now I know better. In a place like this, maintenance is survival written in bolts and fuel and checklists. When people ask how I survived the outbreak, they expect a story about luck, fighting, or some last-second escape into the mountains. There was luck, yes. There was fear and violence and decisions I would never want to make again. But the real answer is simpler. I found an abandoned ski lodge and turned it into a shelter because it was the place I understood best when understanding anything at all had become rare. I survived because other people stayed when leaving would have been easier. Because we treated walls, water, doors, and routine as if they mattered as much as courage. Because we learned the difference between being hidden and being secure. Because when the valley emptied and the roads failed and the world became a set of broken systems, we chose one building and made it hold,